Good morning and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for our 55 and Better virtual programming from the museum. My name is Claire McFarlane, and I am the virtual programming and content coordinator here at the museum. I would like to begin today by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here. And we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. In particular, the museum acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. The museum is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Thank you. So today we are coming to you live from the museum. Last fall, we launched our 55 and Better program, and we are pleased to continue to offer it thanks to our sponsorship from Chartwell Retirement Residences and through funding from the Government of Canada and an Ontario Community Grant. You can also make your 55 and Better experience even sweeter with a Goudy sticky bun. The museum is paying tribute to the iconic landmark by offering authentic Goudy's department store sticky buns on 55 and Better Fridays. You'll need to pre-order your sticky buns, so keep an eye on our website to find out when the next drop will be. Goudy sticky buns are supported by Little Pearl Cafe. As well, we will be taking a hiatus for 55 and Better programming during the month of January, as we'll be changing over our exhibitions here at the museum. The museum will also be reopening to the public on Saturday, January 23rd, when we open our brand new exhibitions. As we change over, as I said, we'll be taking this hiatus, and then we'll be coming back in February with some all new programming to awe, inspire, and enlighten you. One of the exhibitions we'll be opening in January is called Dinosaurs, the Age of Big, Weird, Feathered Things. In this exhibit, you'll discover the new science surrounding dinosaurs, from fur to feathers to fossils. Dinosaurs, the Age of Big, Weird, Feathered Things explores the modern dinosaur and what we know now instead of what we thought we knew before. Get up close and personal to snap a selfie with lifelike dinosaurs, or should we say feathersaurs? These are not your father's dinosaurs, but bring them along and learn something new about everyone's favorite extinct reptiles. We'll also be opening Sonica, the sound exhibition at that time. And so Sonica is comprised of both engaging and reflective works all about sound, bringing together 8 inspiring artists and artist groups to interpret and explore sound. They'll ask questions like, what is sound? Is it something you see, hear, or feel? And you'll be really immersed in this experience. So we really look forward to seeing you at our opening weekend in January. So now I'd like to begin by introducing our speaker for today. So today we're joined by Martin de Groot, where he'll be sharing his presentation, The Promise of Intergenerational Endeavors. He'll be drawing on his experience designing and organizing hands-on, minds-on, co-learning experiments at the Commons Studio. The Commons Studio is a media arts access center affiliated with the Working Center. Martin de Groot has been active in regional arts, culture, and heritage circles since 1993. He wrote a weekly arts and culture column for the Waterloo Region Record for 22 years and served as executive director of the Waterloo Region Arts Council from 2001 to 2011. His current involvements include the Commons Studio at the Working Center, Inner Arts Matrix, Participate Arts Network for Children and Youth, Wired World, CKWR 98.5, Arts Reboot, Waterloo Region / Arts Together, and he also writes on the museum's cultkw.com, he writes the I Am Groot column, which comes out on the 1st and 3rd Wednesday of the month. So please join me now in welcoming Martin de Groot.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks to the museum for the invitation. And thank you all for connecting and joining us here this morning. Martin de Groot is my Anglophone name. I sometimes go by my original Netherlandish name, which is Marinus de Groot. What I'm going to do today is present this as just a conversation rather than as a lecture with slides and PowerPoint and all of that, just to speed things along. And also, a lot of what I have to talk about comes out of my own life, my own experience. So there aren't a lot of illustrations, etc., slides to go with it. So I'll say my piece, and I'll pay attention to any kind of questions you may have or comments, and take them into consideration, and then revise what I had to say, and then post it in some way or other. I might put it on my own website, or I'll let the people from 55 and Better know, and you'll find out where to get the final version. So last night I attended another Zoom talk, and in this case it was put on by Dale Hamilton. Dale Hamilton is best known as a community arts practitioner. She's a playwright, and she's very well known in those circles. And she works out of Eden Mills over in Wentworth County. And on this Tuesday, Dale was a guest on the radio program that I help out with on CKWR. I did the interview, and one thing that struck me in what she said, the importance in indigenous cultures, because that was the topic of her talk, of what she called situating yourself. And then she described herself as a 7th generation settler and longtime indigenous ally. She's the widow of Post Salish carver Hates Rice, and mother of 2 indigenous children, lives on 16 acres by the Aramosa River, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So following her example, I'll start by situating myself. I'm a new settler, an actual immigrant, not the children of immigrants. I was born in Rotterdam in South Holland, and I came to Canada on a ship when I was 5 years old. And I grew up in Trenton, on the other side of Toronto in Quinte country. And places I've lived for a few months or longer over my life include Ottawa, where I was at school, Calgary, Vancouver, and Kingston, Jamaica, not Kingston, Ontario. I now live in a former button factory, built in 1879 when Kitchener was still Berlin, Ontario. Now I have a whole sort of a land acknowledgement here, but I'm going to skip over that because Claire took care of that very well. I'll just say most of my work, as you heard from her introduction, that I've done as an individual and as a citizen has been in the arts, culture, and heritage field. I've also done some journalistic writing, those 22 years writing the column, but my training was in the humanities. I have a PhD in history, and my area of specialization is U.S. history. And I've taught U.S. history at a number of universities, but never really practiced. I haven't written any history books or articles other than my original dissertation. Now, I came out as a senior this fall, as an older person, an old man to be specific. I go by the pronoun he, him. So I'm an old man, but it's hard to escape the feeling that most of what I tried to accomplish really didn't come to full fruition. I was honored by my peers in the arts community by a Lifetime Achievement Award a year before I came out as a senior, and that's reassuring, but there's still work that I feel compelled to do. Compelled, motivated by, in part, conviction, motivated by something akin to duty, you feel you should, by personal ambition. I've never been very ambitious, but I'm more ambitious now than I ever have been in my whole life. And by a measure of necessity, people who work in my fields, artists, cultural workers, freelance writers, unaffiliated academics, we live precariously in terms of income and security. And as a result, I've never been in a good position to prepare for retirement. And to be honest, I really never gave it much thought. I have been very irresponsible in that respect. Um, Dale Hamilton's emphasis on the importance of situating yourself resonates with how I've come to view the world and my place in it, our place in it. As I said, I'm a history person. Historians deal with particulars, actual individual people, actual events that happened or reportedly happened in actual situations at particular times in real physical places. History is part of the humanities, and that means that it's not a social science. Social scientists look for repeatable patterns and commonalities and explanations, and they try to develop tools and they study the data, that kind of stuff. And in a positive light, what they do is study how human beings relate to one another in order to solve problems, to make the world a better place. Viewed a little bit more negatively, the purpose can look like social engineering. Knowledge applied to people to shape them or to control them in some way for their own good, to be sure, and for the public good. But nevertheless, historians, at least my kind of historians, don't do very much of that. What we do is we mainly just tell stories. We tell stories, and stories follow patterns. You find those patterns, you find the stories, you kind of discover them more than you create them or make them up. It's not fiction. But on the other hand, not everything that ever happens comes together in a pattern so you can tell it as a story. So we, meaning the people, use narrative patterns, storylines to think, to imagine, and to share our thoughts and our imaginings. It's a fundamental way of thinking. And in fact, from what I understand, it's one of the two fundamental ways that we think. The other has to do with numbers and logic and all that sort of thing. And this is narrative story. That's how we think. That's how we communicate. This is cognitive psychology that I'm talking about, so I'm out of my element, but that's basically how I imagine this works. Now, what I'd like to talk to you about today is more about possibilities than about fact. I've got a hunch that there is great potential in intergenerational endeavors. And that hunch is based on what I learned through a series of experiences. If I ever write this up as a journal article or a pamphlet, the footnotes would have to be mostly autobiographical references. But this isn't a scholarly offering, it's just a hunch, and a wishful hunch at that. I can't prove it, nor as I'm saying this is a trend that we can all jump on, a projection of what's going to happen in the future. In fact, it won't happen all by itself. We have to make it happen if we want to make something out of what I think is the potential here. For me, ultimately, it's the actual work that matters most, what actually gets accomplished, getting things done. And in terms of work, it doesn't have to be laborious work. The work can be fun. You can work to fulfill a challenge. You can work or lift your spirits, to give you a sense of purpose. And if that purpose is fulfilled in one way or another, it can give you a sense of accomplishment. But those are byproducts, ancillary results of the work. For me, the work has to have a meaningful and practical purpose, and there has to be a good chance that the purpose can be achieved in whole or in part. So to explain what I have in mind, I'll share some stories about how I got here. The promise of intergenerational endeavor is a concept or an idea that came out of my life. It grew in my mind as I was going about interacting with the world around me. Over my life, I have a tendency to drift. My best friend, post high school, in high school and in university, he was brilliant mind, and among other things, he wrote and performed music. There's a line in one of his songs that I'll always remember. He sang, "I'm here today If tomorrow wants me, it's going to have to come and get me. And he lived that way. And for the most part, so did I. I took what came rather than sought out or set a purpose and then tried to achieve it. And the thing about our generation, if you were born before 64, but after 1946, the thing about our generation is that there were and still are so many of us. And we were kind of encouraged to drift when we were young. At least I was, by our peers, by circumstances, and by the powers that be. And drifting along from day to day, year to year, I've done all kinds of things. I did landscaping and construction work, and I was a picture framer in a gallery in Ottawa for a while. I was a plant manager here in Waterloo region, a university professor, a freelance journalist, a cultural manager, community development work also, I've done that. And I've also served on a long list of boards and committees and work groups and advisory bodies, and in those cases, all without remuneration. But almost all the paid jobs that I have done, I drifted into, by chance, and usually by way of a volunteer engagement of one kind or another. At one point, after all these adventures, I ended up at the Commons Studio, or the Multicultural Cinema Club, as it was originally called. The Commons Studio, as Claire explained, is part of the Working Center. It operates as what they call a community tools project of the Working Center. I was involved from the very beginning, always on the advisory committee of the Multicultural Cinema Club. It was founded by a filmmaker from Syria. This was his dream. And it was based on a model of cinema clubs that they actually have in Syria. And they do film appreciation and also film making. Now, when the founder left, he left fairly abruptly, and then Philip Bast, I don't know if you remember him, he was my editor at the Record for many years. He and I stepped forward and we kept the cinema club going, like as volunteers for 6 months. Philip went in one day, I went in the next, and we kept it going. And eventually the Working Center said, hey, why don't you just stay and work here and help keep this going? He retired at 55. It took early retirement. And he set out, as a retirement project, he wanted to become a videographer. He worked with newspapers before, but he worked for the Record. And the Arts Council where I worked had some equipment, and he said, I want to use your equipment, learn how to be a videographer. And it was watching Philip that had a big influence on my life, because he was a big guy. This was 10 years ago, and video equipment was still big and heavy. Camera, the tripod, the lights, the boom mic. He'd schlep these things around, and watching him do that, that's when I decided that being a videographer was just about the last thing I wanted to do. It just looked so uncomfortable. You have to be part artist, part technician, and part mule by what I saw from what Philip was doing. So when I started working at the Working Center at the Commons Studio as an employee, I chose to work half-time, and somebody else could do the videography and the technical parts, and concentrate on programming and development. That's the work that I did. And what I wanted to do was start some more community-oriented programs, which the founder, Azam, didn't do, and acquire some smaller, lighter, more user-friendly equipment, rather than the big, heavy professional stuff. And as it happened, our friends at the Button Factory Arts in Waterloo, the Button Factory, they said, hey, you know what you should do is try New Horizons for Seniors. This is a federal granting program. And they had used it to build up a printmaking studio. So we thought, well, that's interesting, but gee, we really don't want to do programs just for seniors, exclusively for seniors. But we're already intercultural. The name was Multicultural Cinema Club. We're already interdisciplinary. Film includes almost all the arts disciplines. It includes writing, it includes performing, it's a visual art, et cetera, et cetera. So becoming intergenerational, that would be a logical next step. So that was acceptable. And when we spoke with the New Horizons for Seniors folks, they were good with that. They said fine. And so I put in my application and they gave us $20,000 to buy equipment for a shared learning program that we called Hidden Stories. Now, the rationale, it was because the Multicultural Cinema Club, before I started working there, used to run workshops and classes of various kinds as a public service and for a nominal fee, very inexpensive. And these things were a challenge to do because we were committed to paying proper rates to instructors, and funding for ongoing operating costs are almost impossible to get, not right away anyway, it takes years and years. So the workshops really were unsustainable. We didn't have the money to pay for them. And then, even though they were all almost free, like it was $5 or $10 to participate, attendance started to drop quite dramatically. And this was probably due to the availability of all kinds of instruction on how to do things. You can learn how to do just about anything. Just type in a question and somebody on YouTube or another online resource would explain to you how to do it. So the Hidden Stories program that we started was designed with this trend in mind. It was open to anyone who wanted to learn digital storytelling in any format, free of charge. And it was designed so that if you came on board, you were encouraged to try to you'd find some friends, or we would try find some colleagues for you, and you'd work as part of a small team. And you'd get an assignment or help define an assignment with certain parameters. The topic had to be local. It had to have a longer best before date, so it couldn't be a news item that would be old hat in a couple of weeks. So the idea was that this would complement the resources that were available online. Once you knew what you were doing, you and your team would just get at it, and you would find out whatever you needed to find out in order to complete what you set out to do. So instead of working entirely on your own, you became part of a team. And you became part of the studio. You could draw on the resources of the studio, come in. There was a set of equipment you could use for free anytime you wanted. And you would get some editorial and some critical support. And the studio also tried to do what it could to help develop a public for participants' work. At the very least, we put it on our own YouTube channel. And also, I would used to take video shows of various things that people had produced and show them as film nights at senior centers, etc. So we tried to find an audience for it. Now, at the same time we started developing these shared learning programs, the studio also started accepting high school co-op placements. The founder, Azam, was a professional. He didn't it didn't work very well for him. But for me, I thought this would be great. And so we accepted high school co-op placements. They'd stay with us for a whole semester, 2, 3, sometimes 4 per semester. And then on top of that, we'd start getting occasional placements from Conestoga College, plus people who came in on their own volition. And that actually ended up being the part of the job that I love the most. It's a privilege And it's a joy to be able to work with young people. And it's a privilege not everybody has. Um, so the point is, it was by accident that the Common Studio ended up doing projects with this particular combination. Older people, seniors on the one hand, and younger people, youth, high school students, post-secondary students, new graduates. And what we discovered that when these people were in the studio at the same time, what we discovered that this is actually a really good combination. People have lived through many phases in their lives. They bring experience, they bring perspective, they bring knowledge, but older people can also be, we can be set in our ways. We can be tired, jaded, been there, done that, or, oh yeah, I've seen that before, it'll never work, or that's not how it's done, that kind of thing. We can also end up kind of frazzled by all the changes we've been through. Technological changes, everything's digital now, but everything was analog when you were in the prime of your career, when you did your training or went to school, that kind of thing. We have a number of people who came in with exactly that. And a similar kind of alienation can occur on the social and cultural front. There's been great progress in so many areas like women's rights and gender identities and systemic racism, even systemic ageism. But sometimes for some people, it can feel like it's tripping you up. It keeps you on your toes to make sure you don't transcend the bounds of political correctness and that kind of thing. And it can leave you, especially if you're an older white Anglo male, feeling that there's just no place for you, basically, because you're always relegated to this undifferentiated mainstream. So the thing is, working with younger people, a more diverse generation, more in tune with current trend, this can offset that kind of alienation. Younger people have their whole lives ahead of them. So they're in discovery mode. Their natural inclination is the opposite of being jaded. They can be eager and quick to learn. At least that's the natural mode if you're young. And of course, what's especially striking is how technologically adept they are. When I use the keyboard, I still, hunt and peck slowly, and we're at the, when they're at the keyboard, the fingers move so fast you can't even see the fingers. That's just the way it is. So at the studio, when I found myself working with young people on a project of some kind, and we got stuck, we had to solve a problem or find out how to do something, the student would notice how slow and how clumsy I was. They knew that I had a doctorate, Dr. de Groot. I taught at universities. I had my picture in the paper every week. People knew who I was. And yet, when it came to problem solving or learning new skills or techniques, they saw that they could outperform me in every way. And that's empowering. It's empowering for a young person starting out in the world to say wow, and you kind of discover that because they don't have those kind of opportunities to work with people in my position while they're in school. On the other hand, though, they've spent their whole lives so far in school. What they know of the world is what they've been taught, following what's set in the curriculum. And that's augmented by what they learn through the media, through recordings and publications, by reading books and listening to music and watching movies and mass media content of all kinds. That's how they know the world around. That's how they get a sense of where they are, get their bearings. So a lot of what they've learned, they've acquired indirectly, as opposed to through decades and decades of real life experience like we older people have. So as I said, I came out as a senior just a few weeks ago, and one of the actually I did it in one of the columns that I wrote for for the museum, for cultkw.com. Up to that point, I hadn't thought of myself as a senior. And if I did, maybe I'd go and get reduced bus fare or train tickets. And I signed up for a pension when I turned 65. But I was never drawn towards being involved in something specifically for seniors. But then through my work at the Common Studio, I met Jill Simpson. Jill Simpson, her work is with physical fitness and mental fitness for older people. She does something called Better with Fitness and the Great Brain Workout. And she came in to the studio and we worked together on a documentary project that she started and had a little bit of money for, a bit of funding for, about the Eden Mills Tappers. The Eden Mills Tappers are older people, some in their 70s, some in their 80s, who under her tutelage took up tap dancing. And it's amazing when you see what she's done with these people. And when she came to the Common Studio, our contribution was to connect her with some bright young high school co-op students who helped do some of the work, some of the editing and all of that planning. Then the lockdown hit and boom, everything stopped. So suddenly and so completely, and I haven't worked in the studio since March. And I haven't worked directly with very few young people since then too, but we kept at it. At what we were doing, Jill's Great Brain Workout Group, which is centered up in Woolwich, it develops an online offshoot called the Great Brain Workout Cafe. They meet and they discuss and they do challenging things. And she invited me to give a talk to the group. And that ended up being the starting point for the talk I'm presenting to you here this morning. Now this actually happened to be the first thing I ever did in my entire long life, specifically for seniors. And it became a step towards me coming out as a senior, as I did a few weeks ago. Another influence was my neighbor, Silke Force, who started a Facebook group called Wise and Witty Waterloo Region Seniors. And she describes this as a resource and social groups for folks born before 1956, set to conquer ageism. And the motto is, snow on the roof does not equal dust in the attic. And I was one of the first to sign on, but with reservations that I wrote about when I posted my first post to this group. I said, look, I'm well on my way for sure to becoming legitimately considered elderly, but I'm not sure I want to voluntarily identify as a senior. It may be partly because I'm ageist myself. I'd just rather pass for normal because it's embarrassing being old. And due to the fact that ageism is so prevalent, being old is nothing but a liability. People take you less seriously. You'll be open to derision. Okay, boomer, that kind of thing. You won't get hired for anything if you let on that you're as old as I am. You won't be chosen for leading roles or representative roles unless it's within your own cohort. So I said, I'm just not ready. I don't want to do that because it won't get me anywhere. But at the same time, I'm not ready to fight for our rights and to fight ageism. My preference is for a resource. I would like a resource and association that doesn't look for equity or look for support or representation or do research or demand the removal of barriers or demand rights, but one through which that can help us actually do things, especially in the civic sphere. In other words, what I'm looking for is an organization that can serve as a platform or a mechanism for doing what we can at this point in our lives to help make the world a better place while we're still alive and gifted with a measure of wit and wisdom. And I think the best way to prove that snow on the roof does not equal dust in the attic is to work and act and speak and create and imagine and think and innovate and organize and undertake in ways that make this clear beyond the shadow of a doubt. You prove that that's not true by doing what you can. I've never liked the practice of segregating people into age-based categories. And it's especially prevalent in mainstream prosperous cultures of North America and to a lesser extent in Europe. And part of the reason is maybe that this continent, especially the Republic down below, used to be associated with youth. From a European perspective, this was the new world. The US and Canada were considered young countries. The motto was, go west, young man, go west. And even when you got here, the East was older, the West was younger. So the future was westward. Now that's no longer as prevalent as it once was. But this age segregation thing is still very prevalent. And the purpose, I think, is to influence mainly to segregate us, so to persuade us to buy certain things, to think certain ways, to serve as a kind of cohort that certain leadership could mobilize and speak for and represent and help. And I think the result has been very damaging, because part of the aim is to set us at odds with one another and to be jealous of one another and resentful of one another. And my generation, our generation, actually helped deepen those divisions. Never trust anybody over 30. That's what they said when I was 17, 18, 19, 20. And I really didn't buy that then, and I don't buy it now. But there remains the fact of our generation. The fact that now, in the year 2020, going on 2021, just as it was in 1965 or 1970 or 1975, there are so many of us. There are so many younger people then and so many older people now. So they call us baby boomers, right? And I prefer Generation W. With Generation V, the people who grew up during the Depression and the war, our parents, and et cetera, X, Y, Z. But anyway, that's just, I don't want to argue that. But if it's Generation W or the baby boomers, we make up a substantial portion of the world's population, especially in developed countries. 20% of the US public is born before 1956. Might be a slightly smaller proportion here because in Canada, we've welcomed more immigrants and their children to our shores. Now, Generation W were on the forefront of what were called the youth counterculture movement of the 1960s. And now here we all are, retired, semi-retired, or on the verge of retirement, outside on the edges of the workforce and of society as a whole. And yet there's so much work that still needs to be done. The kind of social service work that the Working Center deals with, to ensure that people have a place to live and the basic necessities, and working for equity and social justice, work for truth and reconciliation, the work to eliminate systemic racism, work to make sure our cities, where most of us live, 80% of us live in cities, and we have to make sure that these are healthy and vital places to live. We have to make sure our democracy remains sound and effective. We have to work to radically change how we live so that we don't destroy the planet. That's just a simple fact. Well, there's some of the needs, of these urgent needs of the moment, and there's never been a more critical time in all of history. But it's not all just about solving problems and taking on. There's so much to learn. There's so much to teach. There's so much to conserve. to study, to record, to remember, to tell, to make, to embellish, to plant, to grow, to repair, to make beautiful. So there's lots of work that needs to be done or that can be done, or there's an opportunity to do it. And now back on the problem side of things again, now we've got this COVID thing to deal with. And unless there's a drastic change of course, we're going to go into a severe economic slowdown or depression. You can see it happening. There's so many industries and ways of living, particularly local businesses and smaller businesses and entire industries, the performing arts, food, travel, all those things are hit so hard, and it's going to take a long time for them to recover. So if we try to go back to the way things were last February, March, we're going to lose every possibility, I think, of winning the fight against climate change and some of these other things as well. So to do what needs to be done, we all need to kind of pitch in. We need to do what we can, especially us older people, applying our particular strengths and our particular advantages. And my hunch is, and that's the main point I want to make, is that in doing that, it's younger people who are our natural allies and colleagues for doing this kind of work. So what kind of advantages do we have as older people? Well, we have the experience. We have the knowledge that comes through experience. We have stories to tell, years and years of experiences and stories. We have skills that we built over time. We have relative freedom, freedom with our time. From day to day, at least, we're rich in time from day to day, but not over the long term. We have resource. For the fortunate among us, there's savings, there's investments, there's personal assets, there's paid off mortgages, whatever. For the less fortunate, there's at least Canada pension and old age security. They don't amount to quite a guaranteed income that's sufficient to live in, but they're part of one. They're part of one, so you have something you can start with. So we can afford, a lot of us can afford to work for nothing sometimes, for an honorarium, for minimum wage or a median wage, if there's work that needs to be done. I'm talking now about for-purpose work, not for-profit kind of work. Work that wouldn't get done otherwise. Now, that we can afford to work for less doesn't mean we could, especially not if it's in fields that are for profit, and we'll be undercutting people who work there now. But in the other sphere, and all this thing that won't get done if we don't sit down and volunteer to do it, it's a different story. So that's older people. What advantages do young people have? Well, as I've already noted, they're less set in their ways. They're more flexible. They're more adaptable. They're not jaded. They're gifted with energy and vitality and strength. We have to work to stay vital. They're up to date, especially with technology and with current trends. And what they don't know, they can learn very quickly. The capacity for learning, the capacity for work, they have a capacity for work because it wasn't that way when I was young. So many part-time jobs and that kind of thing. We didn't work as hard as the young people do nowadays. So what about our comparative needs? Well, older people commonly need, if you retire, you need new purpose. You need work, a place to apply your skills and your knowledge and all of that. You need to get up to speed, up to date. Some of us need income, but not in the same way that students do, or that young professionals or people with children at home do. We need connections. All of a sudden, you're cut off from work groups and associations and all of that. You are relatively isolated. So we need colleagues to work with, workmates. We need people to talk with. We need friends. And there were all sorts of ways you made friends when you were younger. They're not around anymore. It's hard to do that when you're older. So what do young people need? They need hands-on experience. Everything they've done is by the book or in school, that kind of stuff. they've got to get their hands and actually try to do things and learn as they do things. They need to get a sense of what opportunities and possibilities are available. When I was 18, 19, 20, I had no idea of all the possibilities. You had a sort of a set of things you could do when you grew up. You know, you might be a fireman, a teacher, a scientist, or whatever, but actually, there's so many combinations and possibilities. Younger people need to be aware of the community around them, get a sense of how things operate, of the civic sphere. They need to discover what they can do, their talents, their abilities. They need to develop practical skills, and you do that through practice, you know, those 10,000 hours and all that people talk about. And they also need purpose. They're beginning their life. They have to find what it is that they want to do with their lives. And they need income, but they can get by with very little if they remain at home or they or continue to be supported by their parents, and also if they hold off becoming parents themselves. You can live in shared accommodations and all that kind of thing. So they have that as an advantage. And like us, they need colleagues and workmates and friends. So there's a natural harmony of interests. That's the point I'm trying to make. What kind of work am I imagining? Well, there's two areas that I personally am particularly drawn to. And I'll go through them fairly quickly because I don't want to go on too long. There's two fields. One is what might be called, so bear with me here, the knowledge, ideas, learning, information, and deliberation ecosystem. This talk and it is part of that, right? It's all the things that people do. And within that is what is called journalism. I'm especially interested, having been affiliated with the daily newspaper for so long. And I also did a lot of academic work on newspapers and their origins and their histories. So I'm interested in local journalism and a possible connection between what's local journalism and what's sometimes called the GLAM sector, G-L-A-M. That means galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And those in turn connect with the arts and the humanities in general. It was a breakthrough for me when someone in one of the Nieman Lab discussion, Nieman Lab is a journalism lab that they have at Harvard University. And it was about the future of local journalism. They pointed out that essentially a newspaper is a learning institution. So it belongs within that large ecosystem. And meanwhile, in the GLAM sector, there's this new emphasis on ideas and on learning. The Cambridge Library changed its name to the Idea Exchange. KW Art Gallery says their purpose is connecting people and ideas through art. The Da Capo Chamber Choir, giving ideas voice. The museum, we're a new kind of museum, one of ideas and experiences. And it's bigger, the ecosystem gets larger when you include things like newspapers and magazines, and then it starts overlapping with the whole education sector, right? So that's the field I'm interested in. Meanwhile, there's this thing with our Communitech that's called the Waterloo Region Future of Work and Learning Coalition. And this is a community of employers, of employees and academics and government entities dedicated to what they say future-proofing our workplace. But the whole point is that learning and work used to be separate, but they're merging, and it never really stops. So I'm interested in that kind of, like, I call it the fifth collegial. You've got early childhood education, primary school, secondary school, post-secondary school. But after that, from the time you stop your formal training to the end of your life, learning doesn't stop there either. So I'm interested in that as a field. And then besides that, I'm interested in what's called the civic sphere, and that includes our role as citizens in all three spheres of Canada as a democracy: municipal, provincial, federal. And then with that, all the associations that were involved, especially organizations that are deliberately there to perform a purpose rather than for private profit. So I've been busy for the last really 27 years, especially during our time with COVID, imagining these various projects that could happen, designing them in my head and trying experiments and that kind of thing. I'll spare you the details. I mean, I can go on with the rest of the hidden stories. We also did explorations in oral history. We did adventures in sound where people just went around with recording units and thought of them as sound cameras. We did Bits and Bytes, which was a digital community scrapbook. The radio magazine came out of that, et cetera, et cetera. I'll go over that, and I'll also not describe in detail this partisan, nonpartisan political thing that I'm working about, but just to say, in all that, where do we begin? I think the way to begin with thinking about things, undertakings, endeavors, is start by imagining possibilities. It doesn't have to be this is going to happen. You just imagine it. You imagine it's possible, and that's what I'm doing here. What I'm saying, there's the potential in these intergenerational endeavors. So imagining the possibilities, and then you create a structure of some kind through which we can join forces so that we can work and learn and discover and experiment and practice and plan things and try things and start things. Now, whenever possible, you join whatever structures that already exist in that field on mutually beneficial terms. What I'm doing, what I hope to do, is relay to newspapers and museums and libraries and universities and colleges and all that, but I'm not trying to replace them or compete with them or do anything disruptive. I'm trying to bring them all together and develop something that's complementary. I wouldn't call it a nonprofit structure, but a for-purpose enterprise. It exists to fulfill a mandate, and to that end, it can and should generate as much revenue as it possibly can in order to do what it needs to do to fulfill its mandate. So, I think there are two segments of the people of Canada who have the most to gain from that kind of work and that kind of association. Two kinds of people who are in the best position to be able to commit to doing such work and who, working together, have the greatest capacity for doing this kind of work. And those two segments are younger Canadians learning and working in balanced, harmonious conjunction with older Canadians. And that's basically, it's not, I'm trying to persuade that this is what it has to be. It's just that, you know, there's something here. I have a hunch that this can unfold into something that could be very beneficial for society as a whole, for our country, for our cities, for our province, and for all of us as individuals, both older people and younger people. I'll leave it at that.
Sorry about that. That was wonderful, Martin. Thank you for sharing all that feedback and information about your projects. And I really like what you said about just imagine the possibilities. Don't try to, you know, put all these constraints on yourself or something. Just think what is possible. What can we do? And I like that you said about bringing together the young Canadians with the older Canadians in a balanced, harmonious conjunction. I think that's wonderful. So if anyone has any other questions, put them in the chat now. We're headed towards the end of our session. I have a question though. You kind of touched on this, but what advice, other than, as you said, imagining the possibilities, what advice would you give to people who want to take on this work and maybe who want to be a part of it too, I guess?
Well, you start with imagining what's possible, right? And then you go out and explore, and because you'll discover these little places where what you imagine might be able to come to fruition. And I think what I try to do anyway is try to look for situations where something already exists, like the program that we tried to do at the Common Studio and the Working Center and all that. And you build on what already exists rather than imagining something and try to impose it on the world at large. It's just a more efficient and a more considerate way to do things. You can't always do this disruptive, like destroy all the old and we're going to do it this way from now on. People resist it. It causes conflict. It is wasteful in terms of energy, etc. So that's my pitch for. And it was the original, like I was part of Kitchener's original culture plan, and that was one of the basic precepts of Kitchener's culture plan. We always build on what already exists. Yeah, so that's what I would say.
No, I think that's great. I think kind of looking at what's already going on, what have people done, and how can we learn from that is a great starting point if you want to get into this work. And I love what you said too about, taking on those co-op students. I know we try to do that here at the museum, or college students, and they can bring so much feedback and advice, especially as you said, with kind of the learning the new technologies and things. But yeah, kind of finding the balance of that, and then the people who are kind of knowledge sharers who have worked and have all that experience that they can bring to the project, I think is really great. So if
you get to know all these people, that's what's so interesting.
Yeah.
If someone asked me, and I must have now over the 6 or 7 years that I've done this, 50, 60, 70, 80 different young people. If someone asked me now, what are young people like nowadays? I could not answer, because what always amazes me is how completely different personalities and combinations. There are some common areas because you are, entering the world and all of that. But nevertheless, you really learn to respect individuality and diversity in the most fundamental way. And I think they would learn at the same time. They have an idea of what old people are, what they do, what they like, stereotypes from movies and boomers and all old people. And then when they actually meet the old people, they're actually totally different.
I totally agree. I know at a previous museum I worked at, probably my favorite part of working there was the volunteers, and often they were retired teachers or people who were involved in arts and culture in the community. And it was probably the most fun part, was seeing them every week and coming and just hearing from them and learning from them. And they were so eager to share, and they just wanted someone who was interested in listening and interested in learning. And I think that's, having that mindset of always willing to learn, never stop learning and improving.
Never stop learning.
I think that's a great part of intergenerational learning. So what can people do if they want to get in touch with you, or do you want to share some information about you or some of your projects?
I can put, it will take me, I'm going to try to share my screen, and I'll put my contact information.
Perfect.
5. Okay. How does this work? There. That's where people can reach me by email, by text. That's my cell phone. And the marinistygroup.ca is my blog website. And when I put together the final draft of this, the text, including some parts that I left out, because I actually go into detail about how the story kitchen, as I call it, works and all of that. I'll post that on my website, and also I'll share it with you, and you can, anybody who wants it just need to connect with by email or contact you at the museum, and you can contact me.
Yes, I'll put all that info in the chat as well, and we'll share that. And I think we'll be sharing a recording of this too, for anyone that's interested as well, to rewatch it and to view it, and definitely to keep in touch. So I'm just going to type this into the chat.
I didn't put Facebook and Twitter and all that on there, but you can find me there too. But it's under Marinus, not Martin. For some reason, I used my original name when I opened my Facebook account a long time ago. And yeah,
So you're on Facebook and Twitter?
yeah.
Okay, awesome. Just typing that all out so people have that information. Anything else? Any final kind of words for everyone before we
No,
let them go?
I'm really grateful for people listening. And if you have any comments or thoughts, please share them because it's something I'm working on, right? Trying to say, well, I've got this hunch and I think we actually can do something here. And what I need is feedback to say, well, that makes sense. Or this, particularly if it's something that appeals that you think you might be able to take advantage of, or you know somebody who could take advantage of, then let me know because there's room for almost any, so many different kinds of engagements with what I have in mind, but we have to grow it kind of slowly and bit by bit to sort of make it fit.
Definitely. And yeah, that feedback is invaluable. I know we always are asking people for feedback about our events and programming, things like that. And it really helps inform what you do and how you go forward.
Also, if you just want to get involved, I mean, radio making,
yeah,
we do this every week. There's lots of things people can do with radio making. I didn't particularly want to be on the air, right? I wanted to just be in the background and be what I call the editor or the producer of this program. But if you'd like to be on the air, if you'd like to learn audio editing and polishing works, or thinking of stories and making connections, or transcribing, or there's all these things that we can do. And we only have an hour a week. The original plan was to do like 1 hour a day, but that might not be possible for a while. But we certainly will put an online annex to the program. And we also are undertaking projects. Instead of just preparing segments week to week, we're preparing sort of radio documentary series of various kinds. There's a team working on a series about women writers in relation to the Grand River watershed. And they just got a little grant from the Arts Fund, the Region of Waterloo Arts Fund, to do that project. So we do those kind of things too.
Yeah, really cool. Well, I think that's everything and all the time we have today. So thank you so much for doing your presentation and for sharing all your wisdom and knowledge and information with us and giving all those opportunities to the community to kind of get involved and find projects to be a part of and to check out the Commons Studio. So I hope everyone who's joined us today has enjoyed this program. Again, as I said, we'll be taking a hiatus from 55 and Better in January, but we'll be coming back in February with all new programming. So just keep an eye on the museum's website to get that information. And yeah, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend. And thank you again to Martin.
Thank you, Claire. Bye-bye.
Bye.